Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. עולותיהם וזבחיהם לרצון על מזבחי, כי טיפי תפילה יקרא לכל העמים. I've got everything. Today I want to do a review, of a book that everyone read over a year ago. But I read it earlier this year. I'll talk a little bit about why I only just came to it. The book I'm talking about is The Safekeep by Yael van der Waarden. Yael, not Yale. Some people would write that with an umlaut. It's a biblical name. It's Yael. We can talk a little bit about that name as well and why it jumped out at me. The main motivation for doing this, having read this after I missed it when it was longlisted, then shortlisted for the Book Prize, and then actually won the Women's Prize. And there was something about the way it had been described that didn't draw me in necessarily. Maybe if I'd found a copy cheap somewhere, I would have read it, because that's kind of also how I come to pick my books. But I missed it. And the reason I want to talk about it is, having read it now, I think a lot of the reviews that I read, and clearly this has been acclaimed, it won the Women's Prize, it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, a lot of people have read this and loved it. And I think that a lot of the response, the critical response, I went through a whole bunch of reviews on Goodreads. I watched quite a lot of YouTube book reviews of this book. And I think much of what I read and saw, perhaps in an attempt to avoid spoilers, kind of missed the point of what the book is doing. And I wanted to address some of that. So probably, if you haven't read the book, this might not be as useful, as valuable, or interesting. If you have read the book, this is going to be my take. Okay, why did I read the book this year? So there is a new English language bookshop opened in Tel Aviv, and it's called Bookhouse TLV, Bookhouse BOOKHAUS. And it's run by an English woman, and there was a big announcement. They refitted a shop. It's right in the heart of Tel Aviv. A fabulous big space. I mean, it's a one might imagine it's a tough prospect opening a new bookshop in this era, especially when war breaks out in the middle of it. It makes it hard for people to come out and buy books. But just before war broke out, one of the things this bookshop was doing was arranging evenings of people to come and have sort of book club meetings, blah, blah, blah. My wife and I went to visit the bookshop, and we saw they were having an evening to talk about The Safekeep by Yael van der Waarden. And so I bought the book there and turned up and had had an amazing experience with the book, and then turned up and had this really fabulous evening. About 35 people turned up, and they've got room in the shop, and we all sat around and had to break up into two groups to talk about the book. And I found even there, and this is a very specific audience of English-speaking Israelis, a lot of immigrants, but a couple of Israelis with just really good English, all talking about this book, and I'll explain why I think that's an interesting group to talk about it. And even within that group, where I thought my opinions and my take on the book might have had wider approval or acknowledgement, and still people coming out with different reactions to it, and I think that's great. Here's what I'll say about it. I'll do a little bit of plot, and then I will talk about what I think is going on here. The plot is ostensibly about a woman called Isabel who lives in a house that has been left to her older brother as a woman. This is 1960s in the Netherlands. The house has been left to her older brother, so she's disenfranchised as a woman. She's insecure, even though neither of her brothers live in the house. She's there on her own. She's keeping the house. She's preserving the memory of her mother, who has died, and in this house where they lived as a family. But there is that, she's uptight and she's problematic in lots of ways, Isabel. And if you've read the book, I'll say here that Isabel is a deeply terrible human being, and that's my take on Isabel. But she's presented, and I say presented because I don't think this is the case, as the protagonist, as the person that we're following, the POV that we're following throughout this story. She lives in this house. She's very uptight about preserving the memory of her mother in this house, and her mother's crockery and her mother's cutlery, and the way the house was kept in her mother's room. She doesn't live in the mother's room. After the mother dies, she doesn't move into the mother's room. She wants to keep everything just as it was while she was alive. Into this world comes Ava. Ava is the girlfriend of Isabel's brother. Isabel's brother leaves the country and says to Isabel, Ava's going to come and stay. Doesn't ask, it's not a request, it's telling her, because in the end, Isabel has no agency over who the house belongs to, and so Isabel has no agency, and Ava is moved into the house. Much to Isabel's consternation, Ava is wild and feral and can't stop touching things and looking at things and getting involved, and sits and talks to the maid, whereas Isabel is aloof and repressed and very struggling to make room in her life for this creature who has moved in. And plot ensues. A lot of people have read this book and said, "Oh, it's like a gothic story of this house and Isabel haunting the house even while she's alive, and her mother and her mother's belongings haunting this house." And then people said it's a love story because Ava and Isabel, two opposites, come together. What is it? Enemies to friends? Is that the romantic trope? Come together, even though Ava does not present herself as Isabel's enemy, but from Isabel's perspective, Ava is an interloper who has been forced upon her, and they form a romantic relationship which is fraught and sexual and sexy. I've seen some reviews, so just a sidebar, some reviews of this seem to have had a real problem with there being sex in this book. I'm astonished that in 2026 there are still people who consider themselves bookish people who like reading books who have to say, well, you just have to skip past that bit. It's a book. These are two adult human beings who have sex with each other. That's written by an LGBT author who is perfectly common. Now, I will even go further as to argue that the fact this is a homosexual relationship is actually vitally important to explaining what is actually at play here and what the power dynamic is. And I'll explain that in a second when I make perhaps a leap, but a comparison with another work which by the end of this book came very strongly to mind. Okay, pause, plot out of the way. What is this book about? Is it a gothic retelling? Is it a romance novel? Is it a queer romance novel? What the hell is going on? It is some of those things, but those are all the vehicle by which the actual thing that's going on here, or the story that's being told, is delivered. And I genuinely feel, and I'm not trying to be arrogant, I genuinely feel a lot of this was either glossed over or missed by many people who read this book. This is a book about Jewish erasure. This is a book about Jews in post-Holocaust Europe and how the people who may or may not have been complicit or sat on the sidelines while Jewish lives were destroyed, while Jews were removed, and nowhere more than in the Netherlands was the Jewish community impacted by deportations, by concentration camps, by the dispersal of once thriving Jewish communities. And this book, set 20 years or 15 years after the end of the Holocaust, is about the inability of Europe to wrestle with what it did to its Jews. Ava is a Jew. The house that Isabel is so precious that she thinks of as her safekeep belonged to Ava's family. Ava's father was deported. Ava's mother was sent to the camps. Ava was orphaned, even though her mother survived the camps and came back after the war, but unable to cope with the world. Ava, her whole life has been a struggle. Her whole life has been one of survival. And this house that Isabel tries to keep safe and preserve the memory of her mother, all those memories, all the crockery and the cutlery and the room that she believes was her mother's, belong to Ava's family. The crockery has hares dancing around the outside as if this is the crest of the family. This is Ava's family, the house, the hare. The bedroom that Isabel thinks of as her mother's bedroom belonged to Ava's mother. The cutlery and the crockery that goes missing, the things that Isabel is trying to keep, all belong to Ava's family, all stolen, or if not outright stolen, as the Jews were removed and families moved in and things were bought. It should never have belonged to Isabel's family. The whole relationship between Ava and Isabel is one of imbalance. We learn by the end that Ava's relationship with Isabel's brother was a stepping stone for Ava to get back into the house. Ava's relationship with Isabel, whatever you think, if you think this is a romance, if you think there's a happy ending here, you're misunderstanding the toxic power imbalance between the holder of the property and the dispossessed and the refugee. The end of the story, again, more spoilers. The end of this story, as it's all exposed, the lovers, Ava and Isabel, are lovers. Isabel believes that Ava is the one doing the stealing, kicks her out the house, and uncovers through reading Ava's diaries another gross act of inappropriate appropriation, to read another person's diaries, another person's personal thoughts, but without thinking. She finds Ava's books and decides that it's her right to read the story, and discovers through Ava's own writings that Ava's family lived in the house. And Isabel goes back and tries to bring Ava back to the house and offers her part of the house. And as Ava points out, it's not yours to give. Isabel doesn't even control. Isabel has no agency in this house that belonged to Ava's family. Isabel is there by sufferance of her brother, because Isabel is a woman in 1960s in the Netherlands. She has no power to determine who this house can be given to, who can come to live there. And Ava is forced, because she has no agency, because she's a refugee, because she's an orphan, because she's a Jew in post-war Europe. She has nothing to do except beg for scraps at Isabel's table. And the idea, some people have said, and we had in this book group discussion, is this a happy ending? Made my stomach turn. This is not a happy ending. This is not a balanced relationship of two people in love with each other, sharing a life together. This is Ava committing herself, as she committed herself through herself at Isabel's brother, committing herself to Isabel for survival. And she says explicitly, Ava, you say I can live here forever, but really you can throw me out at any time. And what more clearer metaphor than for Jewish survival in Europe is that you say I can live here forever, but really you can throw me out at any time. The book ends with that reference to the writing inscription on a synagogue that Isabel has walked past dozens of times without ever seeing it, until she learns Ava's story, and then she realizes, oh wait, there used to be Jews here. And she goes to the synagogue, and written over the synagogue is a quote from Isaiah, Ki beiti bet tefillah yikreh lechol ha'amim. My house should be a house of prayer dedicated to all people. To all people except the Jews. The Safekeep, to me, the title is ironic. The house is kept safe, but not for the Jews. The relationship, the gay relationship between Isabel and Ava functions because if it were a man and a woman, if the person in the house, Isabel, were a man and Ava, we would understand the imbalance. We would understand the toxicity of that relationship, of a woman, even in the 60s, still being dependent on the kindness of a man in order to have a roof over her head and food on the table. This is the fact that these are two women, both disenfranchised, but one is still better off than the other. That even in a relationship of equal gender, the Jew is still at the mercy of the Dutch. The book that I want to compare it to, and I apologize if you think this is a leap, but I think there's something, those who found the ending of the Safekeep romantic might also be those who find the ending of this other book romantic, of which I include myself. Reader, I married him. The world's most famous and romantic toxic relationship. Jane has nowhere to go. She has no choice but to go back to Rochester at the end. And the toxicity and the rottenness of that relationship, based on lies, based on desperation, based on a need for survival, somehow mutated into the thought that you may love this person, that you would dedicate your life to this person, that you would, reader, marry him. Jane is as pathetic and as an abused character as Ava, as the Jew in the Safekeep. And I think the genius of the Safekeep in making this a gay relationship instead of a relationship that everyone can understand between a man and a woman in Victorian England, or when this was said, maybe early Victorian or pre-Victorian, but written, published in Victorian England. By turning this into a gay relationship, we remove that understood imbalance, and we deal with something that perhaps, sorry, Jane, that people are perhaps less willing to face, the treatment of Jews in Europe post-Holocaust. Now, last part, I promise you, this is my perspective. I'm a Jew from Europe. My family were not impacted by the Holocaust. We were already in Great Britain in the 30s, 40s, Great Britain and Ireland. And I chose to move with my family to live in Israel. As I read the book and I see what Eva is being forced to do in order to survive, even 1960s in Holland, in the Netherlands, all I'm screaming is, get on a boat and come here. Come to Israel. Don't live with the selfish, complicit, stupid Isabel and her newly discovered sense of, oh shit, yeah, we really did that to the Jews. I didn't want to know this, but I guess now it's been slapped in my face and I'm eating off the crockery belonging to this other table. All I want to do to Eva is go and bring her here and let her live in Tel Aviv and let her build a life here and let her have a family here. Or not, whatever, if she wants to do, no judgment. That's my sense. And now, reading this in 2026, I am torn. In a way, I guess, I think Yael van der Woden has hinted at this in interviews. I understand that should be a house of prayer for all people. Europe, not so much for the Jews. Israel is Beit Tfilah l'chol ha'amim. It's a house of prayer. It's a house of dedication for all people. But, of course, how can we not be aware of an ongoing sense of dispossession of another people who feel dispossessed, who feel their houses have not been kept safe, who their homes have been dispossessed in a way that may be reflected here. I think this is a very brilliant novel. I think it's an exceptional debut novel. I think it is one that I felt very keenly, both as a Jew and both as an immigrant to Israel. And this is not to, I'm not coming down on either side of what that means for Israelis and Palestinians, but I think it's here in the writing. Yael van der Woden was born in Israel and has lived here, I believe at least has one Israeli parent, and moved to Holland. She wrote this book in English and has spoken about her ambivalence towards the Dutch language and her Dutch life and growing up as a Jew in the Netherlands much later. She's younger than me, so she's growing up in the 80s in the Netherlands, 80s and 90s, rather than in the 60s, which is, again, even 20, 30 years after this time, is a whole other story. And yet, there are people there who know what the Netherlands did to its Jews or didn't do to help its Jews. Let's try and look at it from a benign point of view. All of this is going on here. All of this is coexisting with Israel today. All of this is existing with the fate of Jews in post-war Europe, or the dismissal of Jews, or the erasure of Jewish life, not just during the Holocaust, but afterwards, and their inability to return. And the only place that they were able to go to and build lives is where I'm sitting right now. And we can talk about the what happened and whether it should happen or not. But there's a reason why this country existed and became a Beit Tfilah l'chol ha'amim, a refuge and a house of devotion for all people, when very few other countries were willing to offer that. So I'm trying to do this without being too political, because I don't think it's a political thing, but I think it is very much a story that I haven't seen represented in many reviews. As lauded as the book is, I think this is really a really strong first novel. I'm sorry it took me a while to get to it. I'm sorry if I've rambled on too long. Take care. God bless. Bye.